Hey friends, welcome back to the Rogue Educator, where right now we're just going to be talking about story, because that's about all I have the bandwidth for. And stories are fun and easy and comforting, and those are things that we all need in our life right now. So today I'm going to be talking about my April wrap-up, which basically comprised the OWLS Magical Readathon. And I have to say, I got really into this because, we're under stay-at-home orders here, and it gave me something to think about and imagine that was outside of my regular daily life scenario, which my daily life isn't terrible. It's just very mundane. So I spent a lot of time putting together my TBR and sort of just imagining a whole life for myself inside the magical Harry Potter world. What would I do with my, my owls? If I passed my owls for Metal Charmer, if I passed my owls for Magizoologist, I kind of got into it in a way that took me out of the mundane of daily life. Yeah, so I just planned out this whole magical little life for myself, and at first, I was going to go for Metal Charmer, and I did end up finishing all the owls that would qualify me for the Metal Charmer career, and I still think that sounds interesting, but part of me just wanted to do something totally wacky, totally different than my real life and my real life interests, so I also completed the owls for Magizoologist, because I was looking at the seminar choices, and I was like, ooh, Dragon Tamer sounds kind of fun. And then I was like, oh, and I could put that together with the mermaid linguistics, and I could open up a magical pet shop. And I just had all of these little details that I put together. I was just having so much fun with it. So anyway, I wound up reading 14 books in the month of April around this magical readathon, and I had so much fun, and that's a personal record for me, I think, in recent years for the amount of books that I've completed in a month. And I read some on my Kindle. I listened to a few of them, and the rest I just read from my own physical TBR, because I can't go to the library right now, as many of you probably can't either. So I just used this as an excuse to plow through a lot of books that I have here at home. So it was a really productive month for not feeling like a very productive month in the rest of my life. It was productive in my reading life. So this could be kind of a long video, but I'll try to keep my wrap-ups a little bit short and succinct. So first up, for Care of Magical Creatures, which was obviously for the Magizoologist owls, I read Muse of Nightmares. So I read Strange the Dreamer in February or March, and I really liked it. I thought the world building was phenomenal and so original and just beautiful, and everyone has said that Laini Taylor writes kind of in a lyrical style, and I guess I could see that, and it bothers some people. It definitely did not bother me. I ended up giving this book 5 stars because, the world building was just stunning. The conflict, there was really quality conflict, and a really thorough plot, both for Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares. So there had to be a beak on the cover. There's a beak on the cover. And it's just a beautiful story. There's a little bit of love story in there, and it's a very unique love story, and it never takes over the entire plot. It raises the stakes for some of the conflict and all of that, but it doesn't hijack the whole story. So I liked that. And it wasn't really insta-love either. But it was definitely the most unique love story I have encountered in a while. And also, I am originally from Portland, Oregon, and that's where Laini Taylor lives and writes right now, so I gotta love that a little bit too. Okay, for Charms, you had to read a book that was primarily white on the cover, so I chose An Abundance of Katherines by John Green. I love John Green. I love his character-driven style of writing, and My Name is Katherine. This book was recommended to me a long time ago by a friend who worked in publishing, and it's probably the first John Green I ever owned, but it's taken me forever to read it, so I finally just read it because it's white and it fit the prompt. I did end up just giving it 3.5 stars. There were some really strong elements, like wonderful friendships between the main characters, very well developed. Lots of interesting and funny quirks that really made them come alive on the page. As usual, John Green had excellent representation of kind of high-functioning mental challenges. He captures that really well in writing and in character development, and he did that here too. The love story was fairly predictable, but still really cute. The one thing that I got a little lost on was there's this whole math theorem subplot, and it was sort of interesting but hard for me to understand. So I didn't really follow that part as well. But overall, I mean, it was a good book. It was above average, but probably not my favorite John Green book ever. But I'm glad I read it, and yeah. Okay, and then, oh man, so I had to take a lot of notes because 14 books is a lot of books. It's a lot to remember. So these are not really in order of how I read them, but for herbology, you had to read a book where the title started with M. So, excuse me. I read Message in a Body by Joseph Nfuso. This is another Portland author, and it's kind of his spiritual journey, kind of about how he came to be a Christian and came to just his journey of exploring religion and traveling in the 70s to India, and just kind of how Christ found him, I guess, and captured his heart. And Mr. Nfuso has grown to become the leader of a ministry called Forward Edge. And I believe it's a ministry I'm like sort of familiar with, just being from the Portland area. I think they facilitate short-term missions trips where they take just regular lay people for a short period of time, a week, a couple of weeks, nothing super lengthy, and they work with local organizations in the country that they're traveling to and working with. So it seems like a really solid partnership, and they do a lot of really quality work around the world. So this is kind of the backstory, like how that all came to be. So I didn't really rate this book because it's a memoir, and it's someone's spiritual journey, and just seemed kind of weird to rate it. So, but yeah, it was super interesting. I always love to read people's journeys and how they kind of weave around through life, and kind of the story of how they got from where they were to where they are now. I always find that really intriguing, especially when it involves world travel and trying out different spiritual paths, I guess. All right, for potions, we were studying the shrinking potion, and we had to read a book that was less than 150 pages, I think. So I picked up from my shelf of books that have been sitting there forever, a book called 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. And I ended up giving this book 5 stars. It is a true collection of letters between an American. Helene Hanff is the American. She lived in New York City in the 40s onward till she died. She's was a film script, TV script writer, living in New York City, and she started writing to a London bookseller in the late 1940s to start buying books. She said her American booksellers didn't have what she wanted, so she started writing letters over to this bookshop in London on 84 Charing Cross Road. And this friendship, whatever you want to call it, developed between her and all of the employees of this bookshop over the course of 20 years. These letters cover 20 years of letter writing, and she never made it over to visit while the shop was still open. She did make it afterward, and after the friend that she'd been corresponding with had passed away. So, I mean, I was so shocked at how connected I got to all of these characters or all these people in just such a short amount of time. I'd forgotten how personal letters really are. It was just really heartwarming. left you with a little bit of a lump in your throat because you're like bummed that she didn't get to actually meet this person. But just what a lovely friendship. And yeah, I highly recommend it. 5 stars. All right, and then for Ancient Runes, we had to read a book with a heart on the cover, so I picked up Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, and this was another 5-star read for me for obviously very different reasons. It was charming, it was so relatable. I have been involved in fandoms on and off since I was a teenager, and I have a soft spot in my heart for the connections that you form with other people through these fandoms and the connections that you get to the characters that you are writing about in your fan fiction. And it just touched me in a very special spot. This is the first book I have read by Rainbow Rowell. And I know she is sort of up and coming and popular, and I look forward to reading more from her. I loved that this book had a fully developed fictional fandom. I mean, it definitely reminded me of Harry Potter, but it was very much its own thing. And this book even includes excerpts from the fictional fandom and excerpts from fictional fan fiction based on the fictional fandom from a fictional fan website. That was a little hard to say, but all that to say is very well developed. You get really lost in the story, and you really feel for these characters. You follow 2 twin girls, and they've both been involved in this fandom as they've grown up, and this is their freshman year of college, and boy, does this author capture your freshman year of college really well. It took me back there a little bit. One of the characters comments several times that a month in freshman year time is way longer. And it's so true, because you grow so much and you are figuring out who your friends are, and you're living in dorms potentially, and your parents aren't there to tell. There's just a lot. A lot happens in a month of your freshman year, and that definitely was the case for these characters. So anyway, we follow these twin girls as they go off to college. One of them is much more introverted, much more interested in writing, isn't ready necessarily to walk away from fandom. Meanwhile, twin sister is much more outgoing, much more interested in the college party scene. And so she goes down that path and kind of walks away from the fandom and a little bit away from her sister. And it's just, there's a lot of dynamic. And I will say this author covers some heavy family topics really well, like dealing with a parent who has some mental illness and dealing with sibling relationships as siblings are coming of age, and just all these things. I love the book, and it was very well done. Okay, next up for Arithmancy, we had to read a book outside of our usual genre. So this was a little tricky for me because I don't really have a usual genre, but I picked up a book in a genre that I haven't picked up in a while. I picked up O is for Outlaw by Sue Grafton, and I picked up these alphabet mystery, Kinsey Millhone mystery, whatever you want to call them. Originally when I was in high school, I read A, B, and C, and then decided I wasn't quite ready for some of the content, and I didn't pick them up again until I was probably, 30, and I started listening to them on audiobook, and really, really liked them. I had a heck of a commute there for a while, so they were perfect for that. Didn't require a whole lot of focused attention, but they were gripping stories. And we follow our main character, Kinsey Millhone, as a female detective in the 1980s. So it's interesting to see her solve a lot of problems without the modern conveniences that we have now, like she deals a lot in paper. She deals a lot in digging through actual physical files. She deals a lot in having to find pay phones or borrow people's phones. So it's very interesting that way. And she lives in a fictional city in Southern California, and that's where she operates from. So this book, O is for Outlaw, kind of does a little bit of a deep dive into some of her backstory, and I really liked that about the story. And her writing, or her stories, Sue Grafton's stories, are often very nuanced and they're very well executed. And it's always a really interesting person that you didn't, like they'd appeared earlier in the story, but you sort of had no idea that they had enough of a part to play to be the bad person. In this book, O is for Outlaw, I ended up giving it 4 stars. It's a very good story, but I don't know if it's just I didn't have the bandwidth to keep up right now or what, but it seemed like there were so many characters that I got a little bit lost in who was who and who did what and who knew who at what point in time. So it was a little bit harder to follow than some of her other stories, but I liked it. It's a good, cozy mystery. So 4 stars, and I'm excited to keep going with the series in a couple of months. All right, next step for Defense Against the Dark Arts, we had to read a book that took place on the sea or at the coast. And I picked up Daughter of the Pirate King, which I've had sitting around for a little while. And this is by another Oregon author who is actually from a small town, I think, outside of Portland, where my parents have some property. So I wanted to support that. And pirates. I mean, hello, who doesn't love pirates? And especially female pirates. So I have the physical copy of the book, but I listened to it. My library had it on Hoopla, and I was so disappointed. Let's just be honest here. Such a bummer. Great concept, not great execution. And I know that this was her debut novel. I'm pretty sure it was. And it's like it needed to simmer a little bit longer, go through a few more rounds of beta readers. It's like it wasn't done. I mean, it literally was not done. The last line of the book should be the end of a chapter, but it's the end of a book. And I get really frustrated with series that purposely cut off a story just so you will buy the next book. That's super annoying. So none of the ends had been wrapped up. And I do not like that at all. And I think I'm probably not the only one based on some of the reviews I read on Goodreads. So Daughter of the Pirate King got 2 stars from me. And those 2 stars were pretty much because you had an awesome, cocky female pirate. But pretty much like no world building, no loose ends really wrapped up. And a lot of the middle of the story just dragged. And a lot of the conflict in the plot just seemed contrived to show off some of our characters' extra powers. They didn't really come about in a very smooth fashion. So, no thank you. I did not care for Daughter of the Pirate King. All right, and then I don't have a physical copy of this one. For Transfiguration, we had to read a book that had to do with shape-shifting. So I kind of bent the rules a little bit on this one, and I read a self-help book called Growing Gills by Jessica Abel. And it is not at all literally about shape-shifting, but it does have to do with sort of adapting yourself and your creative life to your current real life. And this was extremely helpful, and I learned a ton. So everyone's a stay-at-home parent right now, but I have been a stay-at-home parent prior to this. I have 2 preschoolers, 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and but I have this need to be creative, which is probably one reason I'm sitting in front of this phone right now talking to you. And it is tricky to find the time to be creative while also being a full-time parent. And I'm sure we now all have a much greater understanding of this challenge. But Growing Gills is the book is about sort of adapting your creative life to your real life lifestyle and your real life challenges and parameters. Super helpful. I feel really motivated in my creative life for thinking about projects to pursue based around the time that I actually have, not the time that I wish I had. And that's fine. I'm just going to do different things right now. So I gave this book 4 stars and just found it really helpful as a mom who also wants to be creative. Highly recommend. All right, Muggle Studies. We had to read a book that was told from the perspective of a Muggle. And I picked up Bill Bryson's The Lost Continent, in which he takes a road trip he's from Iowa. He spent 2 decades living in England, and now he's back in Iowa, as his home base for a road trip around the US. And the first part of the book, he goes east and south, and the second part of the book, he goes west and south. Yes. Really entertaining travel writing, really engaging. He's just very funny and very witty. He has some funny things to say. And his family used to road trip when he was a child in the 60s. And so he kind of throws in some of that humor about his family life growing up. There were elements of this book that, however, did not age super well. There's a lot of fat shaming. It's kind of bizarre that that would be in a book about travel writing, but he comments a lot about the size of people. And it just kind of stood out to me because it was sort of sad and annoying and not very tasteful. Made me feel a little badly for his wife. I thought, I hope she never gets fat, because he clearly has not great feelings about fat people. So anyway, and there's a little bit of just like old white man humor in here that doesn't age real well either. So I don't know if I would totally recommend the book, but as an overview of American small town life, it is very funny and very interesting. As someone who grew up in a large-ish urban situation on one of the coasts, I learned a lot and thought it was good. And I'm excited to explore parts of our country that I've never been to before. There was something else I was going to say about that, and I forgot. So moving on. So those were the OWLS that I completed. And then for the seminars, the extra seminar classes, for mermaid linguistics, I had to read another herbology book, so a book starting with the letter M, and I listened to Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. It's been a long time since I have indulged in a classic, and it was a little bit tricky and challenging at first. I thought listening to it would be easier. It was actually maybe a little more difficult. I really could only listen when I could focus. My eyes are really bothering me right now, so that was probably still better than trying to read it. But it's very stream of consciousness. It's very unique that way, and also why it's famous. And the story sort of follows Mrs. Dalloway, but also some of her friends from when she was younger, and kind of how their lives intersect now throughout just one day in London. We start in the morning, and we end that evening, and there's really no transition. So it's a little bit hard to follow. I started the audiobook, and about an hour into it, I decided I needed to start it over. But it helped, and I got more into the story. But the story was a lot more relatable than I thought it was going to be. Just dealing with aging and friendships changing and things like that. And I feel that. I mean, I'm only in my mid-30s, but there are still elements of that in my life that I could connect with. So yeah, I liked it. I gave it 4 stars. And I think as I pick up reading more classics and things like that, I'll be able to understand them and give more well thought out commentary on them. So Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. And then for magical shop ownership, I had to read another book outside my comfort zone for arithmancy, and I picked up another sort of spiritual journey book. This one was not so much a physical travel around the world book, but more of an introspective deep dive into personal spiritual growth kind of book. This is 1,000 Gifts by Anne Voskamp, which was super popular here, I don't know, a few years ago. And it is an excellent read. Especially, it was so good for me to read this right now, in the middle of this season of life that is way less than ideal. And just the idea of practicing gratefulness. And it's more than just being grateful. It goes a lot deeper than that, but that whole concept was just really what I needed right now. I need to be able to look around and be grateful for the things that I have been given and the mercies that I have been given. So I gave this 5 stars. It was perfectly encouraging for this frustrating season. Lovely lyrical style of writing. So if you don't like lyrical, you might not care for this book, but it goes beyond sort of trite, standard Christianese encouragement, and it's definitely hits some really good deep theological questions. And there's a lot of scripture, there's a lot of her personal insight, and just making connections between different stories in scripture. It was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. I will give, it's kind of a trigger warning, I guess. I expected this to be really uplifting, and ultimately it was, but the first chapter gives a lot of really vivid descriptions of death that were a little bit jarring, especially as a mom of young children. So keep that in mind if you choose to pick it up, that it does not start off on a very high note, but it does get there eventually. Okay, almost there. Then for, what was it? Something to do with being like, the legal defense of magical creatures, or fantastic beasts. Legal defense of fantastic beasts. I had to read another Care of Magical Creatures book with a beak on the cover. So I picked up this beauty called Dinotopia, The World Beneath. I don't know, some of you might remember when Dinotopia was super popular, when my age group was quite a bit younger. The illustrations in this book are beautiful, and that was probably the number one favorite thing about this book. I gave it 3.5 stars because the artwork is gorgeous, and the world building is quite thought out and thorough, and I like that a lot, but most of it is told through the beautiful illustrations. The plot and the conflict and the written story were a lot more secondary, but that's okay. It was still a pretty book to look at and not a very long read because it's mostly just pictures. But I do recommend Dinotopia for the world building. It's very, very lovely. All right, and second to last. I forgot I listened to another book. So for History of Magic, I had to read a book that had or talked about witches and wizards and things like that. So I actually listened to an original story by author Sarra Cannon. The book was called The Witch's Key, and I will link her YouTube channel below, both of her YouTube channels. She has one more for her reading fans and one for writers. Both channels are excellent. Anyway, so she went live every day on YouTube for the month of April and read a chapter of this brand new story that she basically created as we went. And she is an experienced writer, an experienced indie published author. I didn't rate this story because we were all kind of like her beta readers a little bit. And it was excellent and really good plot twists. It's supernatural, young adult, paranormal, that kind of thing, which she excels at that genre. She's very good. I just didn't give it a rating because it's sort of not officially done yet. But it was really good and so fun to jump online at 4:00 every afternoon and get the next piece of the story. They were very lively and the fans were interacting and it was just really fun. I'd put on a show for my daughter, my son would be napping, and pour myself a drink and sit down and get a little bit more of The Witch's Key by Sarra Cannon. So that was History of Magic, which I also had to read for the legal defense of fantastic beasts. Okay, last one. Oh my gosh, so much talking. But I love books, so it's okay. This was for Dragon Taming. It's getting a little hard to talk. Dragon Taming. I read a book that I have had literally forever. I mean, we're talking like 20 years. In fact, I found an inscription on the inside that says, "Katie, have a happy 14th. Love, M." And M is a good friend of mine, and we've been friends since about the 4th grade. So she knew what I liked. Dealing with Dragons by Patricia Reed. I gave this 3.5 stars. It's a very original premise. We follow Cimarine, a princess who does not want to do all the normal princess things. So she runs away and finds herself kind of as a a willing servant girl, I guess, for some dragons. Well, one dragon in particular. And she uncovers a plot having to do with wizards. And wizards in this world are not good. They're very sneaky. And they do not get along with dragons. In fact, dragons are allergic to wizards in this story, which I thought was very humorous. And overall, 3.5 stars, like I said. It's very funny. It pokes fun a little bit at traditional fairy tale princessy things. The conflict and the plot were very simple, but very interesting and easy to follow. The magic system was unique, but it was not totally fleshed out. This book was published in 1990, so I'm guessing it was pretty near the beginning of young, middle grade kind of fantasy, that fantasy genre. So not bad considering that it sort of originated that, or was near the beginning, and it didn't really have anything to base itself on. So that's good. My one beef with it, I guess, besides like a magic system that was sort of, you could just sort of throw in magic and fix the situation, was there was a lot of telling instead of showing. Just a lot of sort of exposition and info dumping, which is fine, but, you know, not the most engaging thing ever. So, wow, that was a lot of books. They're spread out here all over my desk, and I love it. I love my books. I will probably unhaul some of these now that I've read them, but I found a surprising amount of books that I love and will keep. So I'm so glad that I participated in this. I can now move forward with my magical career decisions, and we'll see what happens in August when I participate in the Newts, if I'm not moving across the country at the same time. So we'll see. But anyway, I completed my OWLS. I'm very proud of myself. 14 books is a lot, and it's great. So anyway, I'm tired. I'm going to go get ready for bed, but it was great to see all of you guys. And if you're new to my channel, please subscribe and please go check out some of these books, and I will see you next time. Bye.